The night I walked out of the plant with a folded inspection report in my coat pocket, knowing it might cost half the men on my shift their overtime, the lake wind cut through me sharper than any January I'd known. You have to understand what that wind meant in those days. Lake Erie didn't just blow cold, it carried the smell of iron and diesel and something like damp pennies, and when it came barreling through our town it rattled loose windowpanes and shook the soot from the eaves. Snow would gather in gray ridges along the railroad tracks behind the factory, piling up against boxcars like it was trying to hold them in place. Everything felt heavy that winter, heavy skies, heavy boots, heavy thoughts. I was 26, a machinist at a little auto parts outfit wedged between the tracks and a shuttered cannery. We made brake components, calipers and housings mostly, for one of the big names in Detroit. Back then, that was steady work. Or it had been. By '72 the rumors had started rolling in with the freight trains, layoffs in Cleveland, a mill closing outside Youngstown, cousins heading south to look for something steadier. Our town had already lost 2 storefronts on Main Street that year. The 5 and dime where I bought your grandma her first birthday card had brown paper taped over the windows. Inside the plant, though, the machines still sang. There's a rhythm to a machine shop you don't forget. The whir of lathes, the clack of feed handles, the high, bright scream when a bit bites into steel just right. Sparks would fly in the dim light like fireflies that didn't know it was winter. We worked under fluorescent tubes that buzzed like tired bees, and every man kept a thermos of black coffee somewhere within reach. By 10 in the morning the place smelled like hot oil and burnt grounds. I liked that smell. Meant I was earning my pay. We'd punch our time cards at dawn, stiff fingers sliding the cardboard into the clock, listening for that solid ka-chunk. That sound meant you were counted. In a shrinking town, being counted mattered. The batch in question came through on a Tuesday, I think. Might have been Wednesday. Days blur when they're all the same gray. We'd gotten a rush order, thousands of units that had to be machined and shipped by Friday to keep a line moving down in Michigan. Management had been pacing all week. Even Mr. Daly, who normally stayed in his glass office with the Venetian blinds half drawn, was out on the floor with his tie tucked into his shirt. I was checking tolerances on a set of brake housings when I felt it, just a hair's difference in the bore. You develop a kind of sixth sense after enough years at a micrometer. The numbers told me one thing, but my gut told me another. I ran the measurement again. And again. The steel had a flaw. Not a dramatic crack or anything you could see with your eye. It was subtler than that, a weakness along the interior wall where the casting hadn't set right. Under stress, it could warp. Under enough stress, it could fail. Now, most parts don't fail. They live quiet lives bolted to other pieces of steel, doing their job in the dark. But brakes are different. They're the last word between motion and disaster. I set the housing down and looked around. Jimmy Russo was 2 stations over, humming along with the AM radio someone had perched on a crate near the drill press. The news was talking about something overseas, static crackling between sentences. Jimmy had 3 kids under 10. His oldest needed braces. He'd been bragging about the overtime that rush order would bring in. Everything square, he called over. Square as they come, I said. That was my first lie. Small as a snowflake, but it landed heavy. I pulled a few more units from the batch and checked them. Same issue. Not every piece, but enough to matter. Enough to know it wasn't a one-off. At lunch we sat on overturned buckets near the loading dock, steam rising from our thermoses. The lake wind pushed through the cracks in the big metal door, carrying in a swirl of snow that melted into dirty puddles on the concrete. You hear about Akron, someone said. Another 100 laid off. Won't be us, Jimmy replied, tapping ash from his cigarette. We got orders stacked to the ceiling. I looked at the stacked pallets shrink-wrapped and ready for shipment. Thought about the weakness hidden inside them. After lunch, I walked to the quality office with 3 samples in my hands. The quality supervisor, a tired man named Frank who wore the same brown cardigan every day, took one look at my face and sighed. "What is it?" "Casting issue," I said. "Interior wall. It's out of spec under stress." He frowned. "Numbers don't show that. Numbers don't always show everything." He ran his own checks. He wasn't as quick with the micrometer, but he wasn't careless either. After a while he leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "Could pass," he said quietly. "Might never cause a problem." "Might," I said. He drummed his fingers on the desk. "You know what happens if we flag this?" I did. "Production halts. Shipments delayed. Contracts questioned. Overtime gone. Maybe shifts cut." In a town where men measured their worth by the hours they worked, that was no small thing. "Let me talk to Daly," he muttered. I should have stopped there. Let it be Frank's burden. But something about the way he said it, like he was already tired of the fight, made my stomach twist. Mr. Daly called me into his office before the end of shift. The blinds were still half drawn, slats casting stripes across his desk. "Sit down," he said. He had the samples laid out in front of him like evidence in a trial. He didn't look angry. That would have been easier. "You're a good machinist," he began. "One of our best." "Thank you. These parts," he continued, tapping one with his pen, "meet the tolerance range. On paper." He smiled thinly. "On paper is what matters in business. Not on the road." Silence filled the room. Outside the glass, I could see men moving between machines, sparks flaring in small, bright bursts. "You have a family?" he asked. "Just me and Mary," I said. "For now." She was expecting by then. 3 months along. We hadn't told many people yet. He nodded. "So you understand responsibility?" "Yes, sir." "Then you understand that if we halt this shipment, we may lose the account. If we lose the account, we lose shifts. Men lose income. In this climate, we might not recover." I thought about Jimmy's kids. About the 5-and-dime with its windows papered over. About Mary sitting at our kitchen table with the little portable radio humming while she mended a tear in my work shirt. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," I said. "I know that," he replied. "But sometimes trouble is what follows." He leaned back and folded his hands. "If you push this, it goes on record. Your name attached to the report. There won't be applause. There won't be a parade. Just consequences." I remember looking down at my own hands, grease under the nails, a small burn on my thumb from a stray spark. Honest hands. Working hands. "I can't sign off on them," I said finally. "Not as they are." His jaw tightened just a fraction. He nodded once, curt and professional. "Very well." When I stepped back onto the floor, the machines were winding down. Men were wiping their stations, sliding tools back into drawers. Jimmy caught my eye. "What did they say?" "They're reviewing the batch," I answered. He grinned. "Good. Means we're important." I didn't correct him. By Friday morning, the shipment was on hold. Word traveled faster than the lake wind. The AM radio crackled with talk of market dips and factory slowdowns, but in our shop the only news that mattered was the pallet sitting idle by the dock. At the Union Hall that night, smoke hung low over the folding chairs. The fluorescent lights flickered like they were unsure about staying on. Men spoke in tight voices about management incompetence, about bad suppliers, about someone making noise over nothing. I sat near the back, hands folded in my lap. Jimmy found me after the meeting, beer in hand, bar stools worn smooth beneath our boots. "You hear who flagged the parts?" he asked. I held his gaze. "Yeah." His smile faded, just a little. The jukebox in the corner hummed some old country tune, soft and lonesome. "Man's gotta eat," he said. "I know. You sure this wasn't I don't know. Overcautious? I thought about a car barreling down a wet highway. About a mother pressing a brake pedal and trusting the steel to answer. No, I said. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. Not agreement. Just acknowledgement. Outside, the snow had started again, fine and steady, settling into the grooves of the railroad ties. I walked home alone, the folded inspection report still tucked inside my coat, feeling for all the world like I just stepped out onto thin ice, not knowing whether it would hold. For a few days, it did hold. Production slowed to a crawl while engineers from Detroit were called in. They walked the floor in polished shoes that didn't know the feel of metal shavings underfoot. They spoke in low, precise tones and carried clipboards like shields. The batch was tested, retested, pulled apart, stressed past its limits. I kept to my station and did my work, measuring twice as carefully as before, like I was trying to prove something to the air itself. The verdict came down the following Tuesday. The castings were flawed. Not catastrophically, not in a way that would have guaranteed failure, but in a way that increased the risk beyond what the automaker's standards allowed. The shipment was cancelled. The supplier blamed. New material ordered. And overtime, just like that, gone. No one said my name outright, at least not in front of me. But a shop has its own kind of weather, and you can feel when the temperature changes. Conversations quieted when I walked into the break area. Jimmy still nodded at me in the mornings, but it wasn't the same easy nod. It was tighter, like something held between his teeth. 2 weeks later, management announced temporary reductions. Not layoffs, they were careful to say. Just a trimming of hours until the next contract cycle. A few of the older guys opted for early retirement packages. A couple of younger ones left on their own, chasing rumors of steadier work in Indiana. One afternoon, as we were clocking out, Jimmy finally said it plain. My wife's picking up extra shifts at the diner, he told me, staring at his time card instead of me. We were counting on that overtime. I know, I said. He slid the card into the rack and turned. You ever wonder if maybe some risks are worth taking? Every night since, I wanted to say. Instead I just answered, some aren't ours to gamble. He let out a breath that fogged in the cold air by the door. Easy to say. It wasn't easy. That's the part people miss when they talk about doing the right thing. They picture a clear road and a brass band somewhere in the distance. They don't picture standing in a drafty kitchen with your wife, calculating whether you can make the mortgage on reduced hours. Mary listened without interrupting when I told her about the cuts. The furnace hummed in the basement, old and faithful, pushing warm air through vents that whistled in the night. She had one hand resting on her belly, absent-mindedly tracing circles. Do you regret it? She asked. I thought about that for a long time. About the faces in the Union Hall. About the way Mr. Daly had folded his hands. About the quiet weight of that inspection report. No, I said finally. But I don't feel triumphant either. She smiled, small and tired. Good. I'd be worried if you did. Spring came slow that year. The snow along the tracks melted into muddy ribbons. The lake stayed gray and restless. Work picked back up, not to what it had been, but enough. A new batch of castings came in, clean, solid, no hidden weakness. I checked them with the same careful hands. Months passed. Our son was born in July, red-faced and loud, his cry stronger than any machine on the floor. Holding him, I understood something about brakes and promises and unseen forces that keep things from going off the edge. The plant never quite regained its old confidence. The industry was changing, we all knew it. More automation. Cheaper labor elsewhere. By the end of the decade, our little factory was absorbed into a larger operation, and I was transferred across town. Jimmy eventually moved his family south. We shook hands the day he left, a firm, familiar grip. No hard feelings, he said. None, I answered. I think we both meant it. Time has a way of sanding down the sharpest corners. Years later, I ran into Mr. Daly at the hardware store. His hair had gone white. Mine was halfway there. We stood by the shelves of snow shovels like two veterans comparing old scars. "You remember that winter?" he asked, almost casually. "I do." He nodded. "We got a letter from the automaker a few years after. Said there'd been a similar defect at another supplier. Caused a recall. Cost them millions." He didn't look at me when he said it. "That's so," I replied. He met my eyes then. "You probably saved us more than we lost." Probably. It's a funny word. Doesn't come with a trophy or a headline. Just sits there, modest and unpolished. I went home that evening and sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the grain elevator. The air smelled less like iron by then, more like cut grass and distant rain. Kids rode their bikes down streets that used to be busier. The railroad tracks were quieter, fewer boxcars rumbling through. I thought about that folded report in my coat pocket, about the way the paper had felt against my ribs. How alone I'd felt walking home under the streetlights, snow settling into my footprints. If you ask me now whether it was worth it, I won't give you a grand speech. I'll tell you what I know. I know that somewhere, maybe on a slick highway in Michigan or Ohio, a set of brakes held when they needed to. I know that when I looked at my son years later and told him to do his work honestly, my voice didn't catch. I know that even in the loneliest weeks at the plant, I slept. Integrity doesn't warm you like overtime pay. It doesn't fill a thermos or patch a roof. Sometimes it just leaves you standing in a thinning crowd, wondering if you misread the room. But it builds something quieter inside you, something that doesn't shrink when the town does. The furnace still hums down in my basement, older now than I was that winter. Some nights, when the wind comes off the lake and rattles the windows, I close my eyes and I'm back on that factory floor, sparks flying in the dim light, coffee cooling in a dented thermos. I can hear the ka-chunk of the time clock and feel the weight of a choice pressing against my chest. And I remember that even when no one claps, even when a man's gotta eat, even when the snow piles high against the tracks and the future looks thin as ice, there are some lines you measure twice, not because anyone's watching, but because you are.